everybody. Thank you for coming out today, and I really appreciate you hanging out at the conference today. I'm really excited to be here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about PWA Studio, and the future is surprisingly near. So, a little bit about myself. Who's this guy? My name is Andrew Levine, and I'm a front-end architect at Magento. I joined Magento in July 2017, and it's been a really fun experience so far. This is actually my first time in Italy, and I want to thank everyone so far for being so friendly and so welcoming. Prior to this, I did a lot of work in open source. Most recently, I was a contributor to the Babel JavaScript compiler. I'm also a pretty big animal lover, and prior to this, years and years and years ago, I worked with a few other current Magento employees at Volusion, which is another e-commerce product for small, medium business. But wait. I want to take a quick opportunity. There's going to be a happy hour after this, and I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to really get to know each other. So if you don't mind, just take about 1 minute now and turn to someone who's sitting near you who you haven't met before, or maybe you don't know too much about, and just shake their hand, introduce yourself, and make a new friend. And we'll do that for about a minute. Beautiful.
People are not talking yet.
Amazing, it was amazing. So funny. You have to do it on the Afghan as well.
Yeah.
Well, the video is going to be up, right?
Yes.
It might spoil it.
I don't know, because the people from here, I actually tell people, go to Reacticon, you should go to
Perfect.
Reacticon. So,
Perfect.
because most of them are Italians that don't go usually out. It was great.
Thanks, sir.
Pay attention to it.
Yeah, I don't want to.
No, just go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Great.
that
I
was
have fun.
beautiful.
Yesterday we were talking about what you did with the entertainment, the dinner. I told everyone.
All right. Did everyone get a chance to meet everyone? Cool. All right. So I already gave a little bit of introduction about myself. Yeah, for sure. If you want to reach out to me on Twitter, GitHub afterwards, you can find me at DrewML on Twitter and GitHub. You obviously can't message me on GitHub, but if you want to message me on Twitter, we can have a conversation. I'll also call out, I won't be at the happy hour tonight, so if you want to go ahead and have a conversation after this, you have any questions, you can find me for the next hour after this, and if not, other me will probably be around for the happy hour. Cool, so let's just get right into it. The 29th of June 2017 was our kind of soft-ish announcement on Twitter, but through an official channel. And this was us announcing that we are investing 100% in what we think is the future of the web, which is progressive web apps. And then we kind of went into the Magento factory in Austin, and we kind of just worked on it for a long time being a few short months, before we made a more formal introduction about the technology stack that we're going to be using. So September 6th was when James, my colleague, made an announcement on the blog and basically said the whole technology stack we're going to use. If you haven't had a chance to find it yet, if you Google Magento PWA Studio, you should be able to find all the juicy details in there. Some small things have changed, but for the most part, it's been pretty accurate so far. So let's talk about what a PWA is. It could probably mean a lot of things, depending on who you're talking to. And Jamie gave a great overview earlier of what a PWA is. So a PWA is really when you have possibly wet ankles. This is when you first get out of the pool and you're drying off and... No? All right. So this is a partial wheat allergy. This is when you kind of have celiac disease, but you don't... Okay. So this is when you're at a conference and they have really, really good Wi-Fi, which means that it's not in the States. Passionate waffle aficionado? For sure. So it's a progressive web application. And Jamie did a great job of describing earlier what a progressive web application actually is. This is the really cool community logo for it. As you can tell, it doesn't really translate too well, and I'm not much of an artist, and I am not a designer, so I didn't want to try and make it show really well. But a progressive web app is something that a lot of e-commerce companies have already invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of developers into. The first one that's a really great example is Alibaba. I think the other year they surpassed Walmart, and they're now the biggest retailer in the world. And I believe they already have, yeah, they already have a progressive web app online. I think they said they saw 75% increase in conversion rates. So it's no joke. It's the real deal. You've also got Fandango. I'm not sure if they have that out here. That might be a states-based thing. But it's a site where they specifically sell movie tickets and things like that. Flipkart, which is the biggest online retailer in India, saw 70% increase in conversion rates. Virgin America, I didn't find any stats about them, but they're doing it too, and they're pretty cool, right? And then Uber, their mobile app, this is just to kind of highlight the fact that it's not just the normal things you'd expect in the browser. I believe it was Jamie spoke to earlier about the fact that we'll now have hardware access. So both Uber and Lyft now have progressive web app versions of their sites, specifically targeting emerging markets that don't necessarily have the same great hardware and internet speeds that we do. So I don't need to talk about too much more about what a PWA is. So let's just talk about what PWA Studio means to Magento. I almost referenced my old employer there. Whoops. So PWA Studio is not an editor or an editor extension, despite the name of it. PWA Studio is kind of a collection of tools that's going to allow you to build a progressive web app within Magento. And it's going to be a little bit different, probably a lot different than the current front-end work that you would be doing in Magento today. So there's really 3 different pieces of this. And really only 2 of them are what I would consider to be PWA Studio. And the other one's just going to be your theme. So the 2 core pieces are Peregrine and BuildPack. Peregrine is going to be a collection of UI components. Not the UI components you're probably thinking of, so Vinay will be very happy. But it'll be a collection of UI components that can be very small or very large, and they're basically composed together and built up. And you can almost piece those together like Legos so that you can build a store out of pre-existing pieces. But just like what Magento is popular for today, it'll still be plenty extensible and customizable. And then there's BuildPack, which is the piece of PWA Studio that I'm primarily working on so far. And BuildPack kind of abstracts away a lot of the crazy JavaScript build processes that we have in 2018, and it adds in a few Magento-specific things that are necessary to integrate with your store, but we don't really want you to have to roll that together from scratch. And then you'll have your theme, which at the launch of PWA Studio, we're going to have what we're calling right now a reference theme. The reference theme is our take on what a really nice theme would look like. But it's going to be a bit different than what you have today, where you might have like the blank theme or the Luma theme, and you sort of build up these almost like deltas of differences that you want to apply to that theme. A theme will be a little bit different. If any of you are coming to Imagine or you're going to be at conferences in the next few months, that will be unveiled pretty soon, and we're going to start going into more details publicly about what that actually looks like for you as a developer. So a real quick overview of what Peregrine looks like. One of the things that UI components tried to realize and Knockout tried to realize, and a lot of UI libraries that have come out in the last half decade to a decade, is the fact that UI development works really well with composition. And that's what we're relying on really heavily with Peregrine. So the way this is going to work is we've started the project by building these really, really small UI atoms. You can think of a UI atom as like the smallest possible thing that could be a functional part of a UI. But it may not be useful by itself. So examples of this could be a button, a drop-down, a styled checkbox, something like that. And then from there, you kind of move up the layers of abstraction, and you're going to have e-commerce components. E-commerce components in this case are just composed of all the different UI atoms kind of pulled together. So you can imagine that a payment form on a checkout page is going to be a mix of like the button and the credit card selector and components like that. And then the final thing you'll have is complete pages. So the cool thing is when you first start a new theme, you can get going really fast by just importing entire implementations of pages. And just like today where you basically start with Luma and you don't have to change the things that you don't necessarily want to own the code for. This works similar but through composition. So in this case, you don't need to write a whole page until you decide that you want to make some customizations to it. At that point, you'll kind of pull down the e-commerce components that were inside that page, and you can deconstruct individual bits and drill down into just the pieces you need. So we love open source. I come from a background of working in open source. Being in the JavaScript community in general, it's a really big deal there. So one of the things that was important to us is we don't want to get into the territory that a lot of companies can get into, where you start going into you start being afflicted by not invented here syndrome. So it's important for us that we kind of stand on the shoulders of giants and use the things that have already been proved to work really well. Because we want to innovate in the e-commerce space. We don't necessarily want to write our own UI framework or our own JavaScript bundler from scratch, because that's not really a good use of our time. We'd rather make stores fast in general. So there's a few different tools we're going to be using. The first one is going to be React. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of it. If you haven't, that's completely fine too. React is a really small library from Facebook. They build the majority of their new front-end UI in it. And all it really is a small set of rules and tools that allow you to build small UI components. And just like Peregrine, you can slowly compose them together and make entire pages based off of that. Another tool we're going to be using is Webpack. That was mentioned just in the talk before. I'm sorry we won't be using required.js anymore. I'm sure some people are going to be really sad about that. So no more Webpack anymore. We'll be using, like was talked in the previous talk, just ES6 imports. But Webpack does a lot more than JavaScript bundling. It's really smart about also handling your CSS and image optimization and really your entire front-end asset pipeline. We're also going to be using Babel too, which is near and dear to my heart. Babel is a JavaScript compiler. So we'll be using Babel for the normal things you'd expect. If you're familiar with React, that would be compiling JSX, which is just an HTML syntax in JavaScript, down to normal JavaScript function calls. We'll also be using Babel to help us do ahead of time compilation of some of the cool stuff we're going to be doing with extensions. If you're interested in what that looks like, you can go on YouTube and look up PWA Studio extensions, and there should be a video of me talking like a robot in my bathroom because it had the least echo. So that's pretty fun to listen to. We're also going to be using Redux as well. Once again, if you're not familiar with Redux, it's not a big deal, but odds are you've probably heard of it. Like Vinay mentioned earlier, this is basically just a way for you to separate the state out a bit from the UI of your application, and it makes it a lot easier to debug and a lot easier to reason about. And we found through exploration that it also makes it a lot easier to handle how extensions will communicate together while still having UI components that are very loosely coupled. And we're going to be using Node.js. At least for now, we're not going to be using Node.js on the server, so you're not going to have to change any of your infrastructure you have. Your host shouldn't have to change the infrastructure, so no need to be terrified. We will be using Node.js for all our build tooling, though. So if you're afraid of Node, I'm going to make you love it, I promise. So you're probably feeling right now like you have a bit of JS fatigue. There's been a million blog posts about this. There's stickers that some people have. I haven't been able to get my hands on it yet. Don't worry about that, though. One of the benefits of PWA Studio is the kind of dream is that we want to give you this set of abstractions which doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, but tries to pull away the pieces that aren't necessarily important to you just getting a store shipped. So you shouldn't have to know how to write a giant Webpack config to be able to get an e-commerce store online. So we'll have a suite of tools that'll make it really easy to do that, and you only need to learn most of these tools if you really want to dig down deep and do something crazy. But besides that, React and Redux and the CSS that you already know is going to get you very far. So if you're wondering, like, how can I get started today? How can I prep? We've got a bit of code online for you already. There's not that much docs yet, which we're working on fixing, and that should be out real soon. But for now, if you really want to get familiar with what you're going to be working with for the next decade or however long with Magento, I would highly advise learning React. They have fantastic tutorials on their website that have been built up from years and years of people going through them, saying they have problems, and they've iterated on that, and they've kept it very up to date with the modern versions. You can learn Redux as well, I'll be honest. It's not necessarily critical that you understand it to get started. The most important thing that you would want to know is how to work with React, because that's probably the biggest mind shift. That's probably the biggest shift in mindset coming from a background of like just doing a lot of jQuery decoration of existing HTML. You probably should familiarize yourself with modern JavaScript syntax. That was also mentioned in the last talk. ES 2015 and beyond, there's been a few other iterations since then, but ES 2015 was a very sweeping large change to JavaScript. You'll still be able to use the syntax that's been around for decades if that's something that you want to do, but you'll have the opportunity now to use the fun new things like arrow functions and destructuring and all the things that we can do now because of the fact that we're compiling your code ahead of time instead of loading the exact source files in the browser. And the final thing that you should probably familiarize yourself with is GraphQL concepts. I'm not going to go too much into GraphQL here because the people on our API team would be able to explain it way better than I ever could. but you should at least familiarize yourself with what GraphQL really enables for an application. A super high-level summary is it just provides you a query DSL that's not quite like SQL. It almost looks like JSON, but it'll allow each individual component in your UI to specify the data it needs rather than writing these giant like request modules that go and fetch everything in the world. And then the PWA Studio, using some other tools from the JavaScript community, will really smartly fetch your data as efficiently as possible. But if you Google around for GraphQL concepts, you should find some Medium blog posts and documentation from the Apollo GraphQL team, which is a really great place to get started. So if you want to get contributing, there's a few ways you can do that. The first thing you should really do is just familiarize yourself with what's there already. If you go on GitHub, we're not under the official Magento organization right now for reasons. We'll move in there eventually, though. But right now, we're under Magento research while this is still very much something that we're iterating on heavily, and there's not necessarily a solid API contract in place yet. So if you want to visit that, it's github.com/Magento research. I should probably add Yissi to it now that he's me. We'll work on it. We've got a few repositories up already. First one is Peregrine, like we talked about. There's also BuildPack. What also showed up a few days ago is PWA Dev Docs. For anyone that's not aware, one cool thing that Magento's done recently is every single feature team now has kind of an installed tech writer that works on the team with us. So to make sure that we have really good docs straight out of the gate, no PRs as of a few weeks ago will ever go in until docs have been written and they've been reviewed by a tech writer, because myself and the others on the team probably aren't the best writers in the world, and we have someone that's just really good at doing that. And then we've also got 2 other libraries in there. Those are just really small things that we made that weren't super Magento specific, except obviously the one that has Magento in the name, but we're going to act like I didn't just point that out. Cool, and that's everything. If you have any questions, I'll be around probably for the next hour. I know we're probably going to get kicked out of here at 6, so I'll just hang out outside, and yeah, thank you all.